But you started teaching at the league, right? And the funny story that you always say is that you were in the office one day, right? And that's how you got to teach there.
Yeah, so that was one of my first teaching gigs. I taught a workshop there, and I was in the office signing some paperwork. I think I was subbing for somebody at the time. And they were talking over to the side, trying to figure out who was going to teach hands and feet. And whoever was doing it couldn't do it. So who's going to do this? Who's going to do this? And it was just kind of like, hey, you want to teach hands and feet? I was like, yes, I do. And that was it. That's where I got my first class. And it was great. Taught drawing hands and feet from there. And I think I did a few more workshops there, and then started teaching there part-time. So part-time at the Art Students League is two classes, or one class a week. And figure drawing class, anatomy, structure, all kinds of stuff. And it was great. The Art Students League is a very unique school. There really are no schools quite like it. Has a wonderful tradition and it's maintained this very, I don't want to say it's informal, it's not informal, but it's a unique structure. So if you want to take a class at the Art Students League, you go through the front door, you go right into the office, you figure out the class you want to take, and if there's an opening, they will cut you a ticket for the class, like a little receipt. You take the ticket to the class, give it to the monitor, and you're off and running. And so it's unique in that way, and it's also unique as a teacher because once you have a class there, you basically can just run it the way you want to run it. So they have a tremendous amount of trust for their faculty, and I always appreciate that about them. So you have a lot of freedom as a teacher. So it was great. Did
you go to the league?
I did. I studied there. I think I started going there in 2009, maybe 2008. And I studied there with Michael Grimaldi and Dan Thompson.
Oh, cool.
And it was fantastic, yeah. Both of them are amazing teachers and even better artists. Being there in the middle of the city, I'm from New Jersey originally, with all these surrounded by phenomenal artists, and you just focus and you just kind of get drunk on the excitement. And it gave them a lot of freedom, which I appreciate as a student because I really wanted to study with them. I also think it's a school that teaches self-sufficiency in the structure. There's no hand-holding there, so you really need to figure it out for yourself and what do you want to do. Really ask yourself that thing and find the people who can give you that. And so when you show up, it feels a little chaotic at first, but it's really just on the surface. It's really like a community, and you get your easel and you get your board going, and you wait for the teacher to come around. So yeah.
Were Michael and Dan the same class, or was it two different classes you were taking?
Two different classes. Michael, I think, had just started there, and there was like a part-time Friday slot, and then he quickly got a full-time thing. And then either at the same time or shortly after, Dan Thompson was doing a Friday slot.
Yeah.
So, and then I think teaching it during the summer, which maybe he still does, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny because I took Michael's class at the league. So I was coming off of grad school doing animation, and so many people had said to go back to New York if I wanted to study painting. I'll keep the story short because I want to hear more about you.
That's fine.
So I was back at Ralph Lauren doing graphic design there, and then at night I would go to the Art Students League, and I was in Costa's class.
Ah, cool.
And Costa, I think, had just went from night classes to getting the day class, and then Grimaldi came in to take over his class. And I think that was 2006. And I just remember being in that class, and between Costa and Michael, I think they were just like, what the heck are you doing? because I was drawing totally different from like an academic way.
I mean, they were saying that about your drawing. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I remember just Costa coming around and being like, I'm not sure what you're looking for me to help you do. But
like, what's up with the Ralph Lauren logo?
Yeah, but he would definitely give me pointers. And the drawing methodology, much more tied, I think, to like Andrew Loomis.
Okay.
Where you're drawing like rhythms and being playful with the forms rather than, structure anatomy and like, I shouldn't even say structure anatomy. Structure anatomy was considered, but it wasn't so. It was more about like line and gesture and pushing towards like comics or cartoons and stuff like that. A way to draw, and I always find like there's kind of a few different ways into drawing, and a lot of the times they're jumbled into thinking that we're all after the same pursuit, but clearly from their comments they were just kind of like, I'm not sure what you want me to help you do.
Oh, what do you mean? What? To help me to do?
No, to help me to do. When I was in there, I was just in there doing these like bean, we were talking about animation earlier, like these rib cage pelvis really quickly, do a drawing in 20 minutes.
Totally.
Where they were maybe like 3 hours.
Did they tell you quickly to like, keep your line straight and things like that? Doing a block in, was that?
Yeah, I think it's just like sometimes when you get in these classes, they're just like an array of students and they're all after different goals, but we think that they're after the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think they were just surprised sometimes when they walked around that easel and saw me, and they're like, I don't know, maybe you want to think about structure.
Yeah, I mean, what was when you were asked to do straight lines, like what was your initial impression of that?
I was just kind of in there at night, just like playing. My thought was like just take some of the grad school stuff and tinker with it and see what I wanted to go with it before I really realized like accuracy was never the goal for animation. It was always gesture, pushing the pose, and can you capture something quickly, and I think that being able to slow down later I found out was such a luxury. Patience was something that can't be put on the syllabus.
Right.
That's
good.
How do you bring patience? Like, I can't buy that at the art store.
Right. Yeah.
But it was something that nobody had like kind of guided me into like taking 70 hours or 40 hours to do a drawing. And it was just fascinating to me that now I come back and look at Grimaldi and I'm like, almost like a missed opportunity. Because his work is phenomenal, in my opinion.
He's amazing, and a great teacher. Just still, I felt by the time I got to the league, I had learned a lot. Still had plenty to learn, of course, but I learned a lot. But I really needed someone to help me put it together, and in a way that made sense. And I had gone to a school called Ducre School of Art. Before that, they're in Plainfield, New Jersey. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I went there, at a high school, and I knew I liked to draw, and there were at the time some very good teachers there who taught you lots of different things, all of which was really good. But I might have a perspective class, but I didn't, and I knew this was important, and I knew I enjoyed it, but I didn't really know what the relevance it had for figure drawing. But I knew it was important, and I knew, but when I got to the league and studied with people like Michael and Dan, they could bridge those gaps and put it together in a much more thoughtful and internally consistent approach, which was just, I grabbed onto right away. And just the rigor too, their excitement for rigor and pushing oneself, being inquisitive. One of my, mentioning Ducre, who has sadly now passed away, Rochat, had spent some time at Ducre, and I remember seeing a brochure. He had spent time there as a young student many years ago, and I think they had a brochure of like alumni happenings or people who had graduated from the programs. I don't remember, but he was on their brochure, and what was on there was his painting of George Bush Sr. that's in the National Portrait Gallery. And I was a kid at the time, and I remember just thinking, first off, this painting is incredible. Like, I can't believe anyone can do this. But also this like part of your mind that like all of a sudden opens up where you think someone alive is doing this and the person who sat for it is alive. This is all happening right now. Like, and it had all of those wonderful qualities of kind of old master sensibility in this sort of modern way, and it felt so seamless to me, and I couldn't believe it. And it's one of those things that kind of imprints on your mind, and you keep it with you. And I think that and other things too, like you're from the Charles Fall?
No.
Charles Fall, also very amazing painter, no longer with us. He did a book. He lived, I guess, in the Upper West Side of New York for a while, and he had a book called An Artist at Work, which I still look at to this day. And it's a book made on his work in the 70s, and they would just be these wonderful, moody, haunting, sort of intriguing interiors of 19th century life. And I just thought, I can't believe anyone can do this. And it had all these wonderful parts of the old way of doing things, these old master way, in this what would have been modern, but the 70s context. And it's like, and it just stuck with me. And those, you sort of, I guess, looking back, you don't realize how much those moments you feed on them, and they motivate you to kind of pursue this ability to create things like that. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So was Charles Fell, was he part of Ducret?
No, I don't think there was any association. I found out about him through an artist named Tim Jan. I don't believe he knew him. Maybe he had met him at one point. He also teaching. He was teaching at Ducret at the time. Amazing teacher, very young at the time, and excited, enthusiastic. And a lot of us gravitated towards him. Similar, he just just the rigor and desire for excellence. And yeah, I think he introduced me to him. There was another teacher there who was older, a pastel artist. She was friends with him, I think, and Frank Filatico, who was running the school at the time, taught the anatomy classes. I believe he visited his studio at one point. So I think there was all those connection, but yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So he inspired you. Ron Scher was at Ducret?
He a long time ago.
Yeah.
We never crossed paths, but he would have been there a long time ago. I think he was just a kid. If I had to guess, there was a portrait painter, a pretty well-known one, who was teaching there for years. I think he spent time with, I can't believe I'm slipping on his name now.
Aaron Schickler?
No. Furman Fink. I think he was New York based. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So then after Ducret, you found yourself wanting more and then headed into Manhattan?
Exactly. Yeah. Went into New York. That was just sort of the natural way to go. The Art Students League. Do you need to?
No.
Okay. Some of the artists that were there and around it came from the National Academy of the Art Students League. It's a natural way to go. I was aware of Grimaldi's work and Dan Thompson's work, and you're just, at the time, you just see what they're doing, and you just are like, I want to do that. And also, I think at the time, this is going back a little ways, but like, I could put together the pieces of like who studied with who. Like there's who was, I think, Michael had spent time in Ron Scher's class, also studied with Ted Seth Jacobs, things like that. And so you kind of are like, you see where like people are coming from, and you think, oh, this is like the direction I want to go in,
Yeah.
So.
And Dan was with Nelson, right? Nelson Shanks?
Nelson Shanks, yeah. I mean, Dan, totally. So you think they are great artists in their own right, but they also have this great sort of body of knowledge that they've been exposed to, and you're like, that's the thing I want. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So then, so you were with Michael and Dan at the league, and then I feel like this seems to dovetail with Janice, right? Like,
Yeah.
did they say like, hey, we're starting a new school, and then like 2009 or 2010?
That was it. Yeah. I was enjoying being with them, and they started this new school. So I said, if that's where you guys are going, I'll go up there with you. So I think it was around for about maybe a year or even that by the time I joined in. Janice Collaborative was a small art school in East Harlem, and there Kate Lehman was teaching there, also just phenomenal artist, and Steve Perkins, a sculptor, stationed in Florida. And I didn't know, I did a little sculpture before him, but he really kind of awakened in me how much all these things were cross-pollinating each other and mutually enhancing each other, painting, sculpture, and drawing, and really they're all sharpening each other.
Intertwined, yeah.
Yeah, so we did crochet with him. We did like geometric breakdowns of the hand, and all kinds of things. It was great. Great little studio in Harlem. It was like an old wood shop with some great skylights. And I spent about not quite 3 years, about almost 3 years there. And by the time I was done, I started teaching. I started teaching there, and then I think shortly after that, the Art Students League. And it was great. It was a struggle. I monitored for most of the classes that I took, but it was a great education. But I had to I just look for the artists I wanted to study with, look for the people I knew who knew what they knew. They knew what they were talking about, and you just you did your best to just kind of submit to what they were saying. I like to think that's what I was doing. Maybe if you asked them, you'd get a different story. I don't know. It was good. And then actually that is where I met Jordan and Amaya, who are our artistic directors here at the Lyme Academy. And they actually were the last class I ever took. They taught a workshop that I monitored, and I was familiar with them and their work, and it was a great opportunity to monitor the class. It was a portrait class, and caught up with them later. So. Yeah.
Did they teach at their Students League? Or was it Janice?
Janice. But I think they did a workshop there,
Yeah.
but not a lot. But yeah.
It's so funny to see how we're all so intertwined with the same or similar stories. Like I studied with Dan a little bit at the Art Students League at night, painting, and he would come around. His class was huge, so it was like 5 minutes each student.
It's like sometimes over 30 people in those classes. It was just remarkable.
I did Grimaldi one summer, and I signed up, and I missed the first day, and I showed up the second day, and there was this tiny little rinky-dink spot for me to be in, and I was like, I can't fit in that. And I drew the first day, and I got yelled at for being in somebody's way, and I never returned. So by the time I saw the value of Grimaldi, because I love how beautiful and tonal and different his work looks, it's atmospheric. I was giddy to get in there. I barely got, I think it was the last spot, and then showed up a little late and realized maybe not.
Yeah.
But Perkins actually, the overlap for me was that he was at the Academy of Art University teaching crochet.
Oh, cool.
I think he was the head of the sculpture for grad, and he was going to be the one that I was going to take sculpture with, but I quit.
Okay.
And came back, and then I saw that he was intertwined now with, I think, GCA. Then when I was at Water Street, I was going, so Water Street and GCA, as you know, were different things at a certain time.
Totally.
And Jacob was always saying, you should sculpt if you're going to paint, because we're talking about planes and form and light fall off and all that stuff. And he's like, Stephen Perkins would be perfect for you. So I would go take his class. It was just blocking in, 1 day block in portraits at GCA. It was awesome.
Yeah, that is cool. And were you taking a pretty kind of planar approach to things, or was it more sketching? Or
Yeah, it was more just following his lead. You know, a lot of the times, and I remember even in grad school, I would get dirty looks from students if you were following what the teacher said too often. I thought it was so strange to me.
Forget those people.
Yeah, and they were like, "Oh, teacher's pet," and I was like, "Teacher's pet, I'm really just trying to understand. Like, before I can express myself, I need to understand what you're trying to teach me."
Yeah.
And I'm always one to just be like, "I'm going to follow your lead." And then he would come around and sketch and draw the zygomat, the angle of the jaw, things like that, and see them as planes, and kind of make it, you know, everybody, I think, not everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of students end up going into like articulating eye folds and stuff like that, where he's like, no, think of almost like the Johnasaro head, and then you articulate into that, but there's no, if you don't have it blocked in correctly, there's no sense in putting an eye in there.
Totally, yeah. And like at some point, in order to really understand what the teacher's talking about, you have to do what they're asking. You have to like and almost put blinders on and just do it. And then you get it down, you move on to the next thing. You know?
Yeah, and think about it. You know, I think one of the things I say a lot to my students is even if you get it, you do it once, you still have to go do it over and over. So it becomes like secondhand. Like there's no musician in a symphony that still gets a metronome out to figure out the pace that they're playing. Batters will warm up for baseball, but you know, they're not hitting off tees.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and I think for me too, I'm trying to remember my whole experience. I think I came to understand as a student that like whatever, if I was sculpting or painting or drawing, I was trying to make something really well done, but it also is a reflection of what I understand. And if I'm not able to execute what's being taught, then there's a lack of understanding there. There's something I don't really get. And the only way to really get it into the drawing is to like, if by crafting that thing as specifically as you can, you now can claim to understand it and then move on from there. And really to see the drawing as a manifestation of our understanding is...
Yeah, there's no such thing as happy accidents.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's kind of, if you did it once, you should be able to get it over and over and over. And if you can't, then it was a happy accident.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. And why? And you can't rely on that, right?
Yeah, and I think you and I were talking about like the Michelangelo quote, and Perkins was the one who said it, was to do a whole lot of finishes, you have to do a whole lot of starts.
Yeah.
So he was all on that, like, block it in. I think Chad does it here too, where you're just going in like an hour or two, just knocking it out and then tearing it down and then come back and do it again.
I'm not sure if this is exactly right, but I think almost the entire first year with his students, they're just doing lots of starts to just get the major planes down, have those drilled into their memory, so there's just no hesitation later, they just do it.
Yeah, and there's overlap between drawing program too, where you're basically, I mean, when I'm teaching drawing, and I'm going to be doing it here a little bit more with you, but there's an overlap, obviously, between drawing and blocking in. And we were talking about the program that we kind of are putting together for the continuing ed here at Lyme Academy, and how you really have to build that solid foundation, right? Which is what block-ins are. And blocking in clay versus blocking in with drawing, very similar, to learn the opening, almost like in chess, the opening move, which sets everything up after. Yeah. Were you going to tell me more about that? No, that's it.
Okay, yeah.
No, but I mean, like,
a great point.
I think that probably what can seem like the most boring part for students is blocking in, where they're like, no, I already know how to draw, right? Mm-hmm. But I think for me, one of the biggest ego squashers was to come in and realize, like, I know nothing and this person knows more than me. And that was like, just show me what it is. And if you tell me I have to stay here for a long time, you know, I think at the beginning we reject the concept, and then we're just like, I don't see the value of this. But if you can and see that little value, that big value really, see that value, and then you'll be able to spend the time there and understand. Like, it's so funny because like there's parts in like painting I remember just being like really excited about, and then other parts where I'm like, I don't want to paint all those folds, but I chose to, right? and it's like you have to like all aspects of it. And to me, blocking in is like you have to embrace the love for blocking in, or you're not going to do good block-ins.
Totally. And get sort of engaged in the exercise of improving.
And seeing the value of why it's so important.
Totally. Yeah. And something you mentioned, like some people may say, I already know how to draw or something like that. And on one level, they probably do. You don't really need to know anything in order to learn how to draw. Everybody can draw. But I think the real question is, how well do you want to be able to do this? And for some people, they want to do it at a very high level. And if that is the thing you want, then there's a path towards that. And there's steps you need to sort of walk through and accept on your path towards that. And like all things, the analogy I always think of is like when you see someone playing a musical instrument, like when they're an expert at it, you go to Carnegie Hall and you watch somebody, it looks so easy. It's just like effortless and coming out of them. But there's years and years and hours of very focused training on very specific aspects of what they are doing over and over and over again. And in the moment, those things might seem disjointed or unrelated, but they have the foresight and they'll probably have very good teachers who they trust, and they're just going to go through step by step by step. And it begins to come together for them so that they can go on stage and do these things. And I think that path is not for everyone,
Yeah.
That's for, but, for a place like the Lyme Academy, we want to be a place for people who want that, who really just want to do things on a really high level and realize it's going to be a process, and it's not always going to be a walk in the park. So.
Yeah, there's a beautiful Andrew Loomis quote. I love quotes, and I always look them up. And one of the ones that struck me that I found, because I'm always looking when I'm writing books, I love to pop them in there.
Yeah.
That really kind of enforce in a quick read what it is I'm trying to say in the chapter. And one of them is learn it now. Structure, perspective, anatomy. So you don't have to fight it for the rest of your career.
Totally. And get to the point where you don't have to so like analytically think of it. But
it's the language that you're speaking.
Totally.
Yeah. And you don't have to worry about the words. You're putting together the stories now with it.
Yeah. And that I love that, because I think about when you say that, I think about him, and I think about is that coming out of his interaction with some students? Because
he's probably yelling at somebody.
Because I'm thinking one of the biggest frustrations as a teacher, and heartbreaking too, is to have a brilliant, talented student who is hesitating, and all you want for them is just do it. Don't just go for it.
Stop fighting it.
Yeah. And it's going to be awesome on the other side, and who is really trying to figure it all out before they do it, and it's just like that. Just do it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time they get overly excited. Yeah. Like they'll learn the skill, and then they're just like, oh, I can't wait to jump ahead and now do a figure painter or something, or a multi-figure narrative, and you're just like, we'll get there. Like just slowly go through the steps and trust the process.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, exactly. Just trust the steps. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an awesome program here. I guess we can shift to talking about Lyme. So you had left Janus. I think you had graduated from there, and then you were teaching at the league, and then you were in New York, and then I think 2021 is when we opened Lyme. I say we because I'm a part of it, but you were here from the beginning.
More. Yeah.
2021, something like that?
I think something like that. I'm having trouble with the last few years of my life. It feels so short. I was in New York for quite a while. There's, as you might imagine, there's a billion stories in there.
Yeah, the VP of Salmagundi, right?
For a short time, that was... Salmagundi was just a great place. Particularly like going to events, and like as an artist you're sort of isolated, but going to events and getting connected to people. So very grateful for that. And so in New York was wonderful in lots of ways. And then part of that experience was teaching briefly at the Florence Academy when it was in Jersey City.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. They had a branch there. And that's where I started my kind of working relationship with Jordan and Amaya. And
but you had probably like met them when you were their monitor and then stayed in touch.
Yeah, I think they were in Italy and Spain for a while, and then I don't know how much we kept in touch. But
you didn't just like do a call for like a drawing instructor and you showed up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. No,
you remember me?
Yeah, just knocking on the glass. No, you know what? That started.
You weren't in the office, and they're like, "Who can teach drawing here?" And you're like, you were accidentally there as well.
Yeah, exactly. It started because I sat for a portrait with Jordan.
Oh yeah, that's the one that's on the cover of the magazine.
Yeah, on Fine Art Connoisseur, which was great. And you're sitting for a portrait for many sittings, great conversations, and great painting. Certainly learned a lot just watching him work too. And then I think I started teaching a night slot figure class there for a little while, and then for part of a year I started teaching the anatomy class, which was when the school closed, and that was right before COVID, and went through COVID in New York, and started coming up here. They came up here to revive the Lyme Academy, and I started commuting, doing the anatomy class here. And then did a year of that, and then they asked me to come up and run the continuing education program.
Wow.
Which has grown quite a bit. It's very exciting. The whole school has grown. And then also my anatomy classes have expanded as well, so everything's just kind of growing. I moved up here, and it's been great. I think everything was perfect. I just wasn't sure if I was ready to leave New York, and I'm very glad I did. It's great up here. I love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know how, but you guys got my name and said, like, come do a book talk or something here.
You just happened to be in the office.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, hey, do you guys need some paper clips?
Right, exactly.
And, but yeah, I gave you the talk, and then you were like, hey, do you want to teach in the continuing ed? And I was like, I'd be honored to, but it was tough at the beginning there because I had a 2-year-old who's now 5. But yeah, it worked out. Now I'm part of continuing ed with you, and it's an honor to be here. It's such
it's great to have you.
Awesome place.
Totally, yeah, and people love your class, so it's pretty awesome. The whole how do you sort of condense it all? It's just taken off. I think with continuing ed, we were very excited about what we were doing in our core program, which is our full-time program. And we were trying to think how can we bring as much of that into an open enrollment program for continuing ed. And so the mission is really just, to the best of our ability, put together classes with excellent instructors who get just sort of, raw, like bare bones academic quality instruction for people who just don't have the time to give a full-time commitment. And so that's always been our aim. And we kind of built it from the ground up, and when you do that, you kind of aren't really sure, like, we love this, do others? And turns out many other people want that as well. It's been very exciting. And then shortly after I came in, Chad Fisher was hired to be our sculpture chair. He's done an amazing job. I know Chad from Janus Collaborative, so we met years ago and then reconnected when he got this position. And he's built up a brand new sculpture program, which I'm also a part of. I teach the anatomy classes for them as well. And it's just been kind of unreal, like how it was only like a few years ago there was really just 12 core students in a room, and now the campus is almost entirely filled out, and we'll have full enrollment coming up in the fall. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you are teaching in sculpture and the drawing program, right? You're drawing anatomy structure teacher at Lyme. Can you talk about the overlap you feel between those two? Because we were just talking about, I don't think enough people sculpt.
Yeah.
And I feel like, for me, that really seemed to kind of, like, we always got up and walked around a cast, and we looked at the form and the light, and Scott Waddell and Doug Flint were two that really helped me to see that there was a geometry in the light in relation to the form. And then sculpture seemed to be that, like, tactile feeling of direction of the plane. And then when I would look at the light, I'm like, oh yeah, the underside of the lid, is facing this way. So you were going back off of memory as well.
Yeah, totally.
How did that affect you in your teaching? How are you teaching? Because you're doing a little bit of you're doing the crochet as well now, right?
Yeah, I do all the crochet. Yeah, totally. And which is a great class to teach. I don't know. You kind of summed it up pretty well there in terms of its importance and how it all works. I think learning to draw and learning to sculpt, are making you a more visually aware person, aware of light effects, aware of your perspective, aware of forms, and to be knowledgeable and articulate about those things. And like we mentioned before, when you first learn them, you have to be very deliberate, you're very analytical, you're very careful. Maybe it feels a little awkward but you're very good and careful about it. And then they sort of get into your intuitions, they get into your kind of your thinking. And so maybe when you're drawing, it may manifest itself, the sculptural part. Even though you're working on this 2D thing, you might be looking at the head of a portrait you're drawing, and something about it doesn't exactly look right. But it's not really that your height to width relationships are totally off. It just looks like the forehead's like a little tweaked or something. And if you have the kind of structural understanding and understanding perspective, you can sort of look at the whole and know the variables, which are a lot, to change just right so it locks into place and it becomes harmonious. You really can't, if you don't have that and you're just kind of reliant on moving kind of abstract shapes around, which is also an important skill set to have. But if that's all you have, it's a little hard to be very strategic in that way.
Yeah.
There are problems in all things, especially sculpture and art, that require multiple things to arrive at one solution rather than, and so that's the best way I could say it. I think too, when you're drawing, when you're sculpting, you're working in actual space, and it's out here in front of you, and you have to be kind of precise about your decisions. That's why it's important to have a very good teacher, someone like Chad Fisher, who has a great history and lineage, to kind of guide you in the sort of optimal ways of breaking things down. But like when you're drawing, you're doing this in perspective. You're doing an illusionistic space. And perspective is another one of those things that feels very mechanical at first and things, but what it's really doing as you go through the mechanics of it, you're training and conditioning your thoughts, your inner thoughts and feeling for your vision, so that it actually does feel like you're sort of reaching into the paper and manipulating things and turning things. Like it's almost like the abstraction dissolves and you're just in the illusion yourself, and then you're really sort of engaged in it. Of course, everything in drawing just goes into painting. I like to say that painting is just drawing with a fuzzy stick, which of course is not entirely true because there's more, but it's certainly not less. So
yeah, I feel like what that did for me for sculpting, like sculpting is reaching through that two-dimensional surface.
Yeah. And
I always feel like my drawing tool or my painting is a sculptural tool. I never feel like I'm like pushing a fuzzy, soft brush with paint on it. And I think that's one of the weird things, like when people watch me and then they try to tell me what I just did, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm sculpting the form, is what I even totally. Say it's like that. And then it's looser at times where I'm more playful with the sculpting. But I even look at the tool sometimes or watch like a video playback, and I'm like, yeah, you can kind of see even the way I'm modeling it, where it's planes or tiling method, or is really articulating. And I really feel like, I remember Jeremy Ortel was one of the students at Water Street, and he was trying to say that it's almost like those 3D calendars where you look at these. Do you remember the 3D calendars where you have to kind of cross your eyes and be able to see? Eventually, you'll see the depth in them.
You said calendar?
Yeah, they were like calendars in which they were just patterns, and if you looked at them the right way, you would train your eye to see. All of a sudden, it would be like bam, and then you'd be like, "Whoa, there's space here."
Yeah, yeah.
And that's really what the magic trick was. So when I get students asking me like, "What are you doing that's different?" And I'm like, "Sculpting."
I'm just doing it. Like,
yeah, but I'm sculpting.
Yeah,
it's beyond two-dimensional paper or surface. Mm-hmm. It's space, and I think that really goes into perspective and structure. And we were talking about the morphology, the surface, and going beyond that.
Yeah. Some
stay at the surface. Some go deeper. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts would just echo that. There's nuances and changes that are very difficult to see unless you're engaging those kinds of ideas, and then you do see them.
Yeah.
And you can see in people's work if they see those things or not. Yeah. So I think there's a level of sophistication that is just never going to be there if you're not engaging those kinds of ideas.
Yeah, and I think the more you and I study on these, like you love Blatchfield, I know.
Yeah.
But a lot of the digging into the French academic tradition, or our students that you were talking about, Ted Seth Jacobs, is just this deep understanding of all these concepts, which creates this super deep well, I think, for us, almost like a never-ending well of books and people to talk to that kind of tip you towards like another way.
Completely, yeah. And of course, we live in a day and age with the internet and just even free material that's out there. Like you go archive.org is such a great resource where you can just find so many of these books that wasn't that long ago that was just, you needed to have library access to like some obscure academic facility to see those things, and I'm sure that still exists, but certainly the availability of so many things like what I do a lot of reading now, I was telling you about, is Jules Piet on the projection of light on architectural forms. He was teaching these architecture students in Paris in the 19th century these things. And it's fascinating. I mean, I love architecture and I love learning about these things, perspective, but even just to think like this was, across the hallway they were, so to speak, doing figure drawing and painting and sculpture. This is what their architectural equivalents were learning, and it's part of the kind of soup of intellectual soup of Paris at the time. And I love thinking about it on that level too, because I know those things change the way I look at shadows in my paintings, not just aesthetically, but even just technically.
Sciography, right?
Sciography, yeah.
Yeah, the study of the geometry of light in relation to the form cast onto another form. So the light in space, and lighting things could be done, figure it out, rather than having to have something sit in front of you. Yeah,
and going back to the point we were making before, that also transforms the way you see actual light effects that are in front of you. And I found out about it because I have this book I got from the ICAA's website. I've forgotten the author's name, but he is writing down for the American audience the kind of Beaux-Arts curriculum that they had in Paris, and talking about the importance of every step. And there's these wonderful ink wash drawings of like a Doric column that you swear are like black and white photographs. They're so beautifully done, but are done from all of these geometric work and fine ink wash modeling. And he goes on to explain it. And there's this like line in there where he's like, he's talking to these architecture students, and he's like, but we don't really need to go in depth into that part of it because you guys have Jules Piet, and you just go get his book. Like, it's just sort of like everyone knows this kind of thing. It was so common knowledge, just now we're writing down, And I was like, who's Jules PA? And then going back to the internet point, you just Google it, find all kinds of amazing stuff. It's untranslated, I don't read French, but if you wade through it enough, and with translation technology now, you can start to really get a good sense of what's being talked about there. And so I forget what got us onto this point, but it's a great time to sort of see the precedent for many things that we're doing now, and also add a few missing pieces if there are any.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in what that really digs into is just that there's a deep sense in the work of the ones that we really admire, and it's not very much just kind of surface. Very, very, very well trained in understanding of everything. I always feel like when I'm teaching this stuff, like perspective, because I've taught perspective at Mass Art in Boston. I think what it does also is it opens the eyes to students, so that it's kind of like, you may not have noticed this before, but there's 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, there's also a 3 point perspective, and taking that and saying, like, now go out in the world, just go look today and notice it,
right. Yeah.
And I feel like even when I do portrait, I'm like, think about the rotation of the head as a sphere, or the center line, and just look at people on the train today,
Yeah.
and sketch them and see if you can catch that.
Yeah.
And you begin to kind of notice everything. It's really, I think the artists are the ones who stop and smell the roses, but they're seeing something very, very deep.
Completely, yeah. And I always thought it felt a little like waking up from the Matrix kind of thing. Like, all of a sudden you look out in the world and you see something, it's all the same, but it all looks completely different. And perspective is one of those things, because it just, all of a sudden your experience is filled with vanishing points, and all of these lines are you sort of see the hidden structure behind the material things.
So I think a cool thing to talk about, it's always cool to like walk around your studio and see what you're working on, because it's everything between like teaching tools and teaching drawings on the wall, and we were talking about like doing rotations, because you're trying to bridge the gap between three-dimensional structure knowledge and sculpture. But you're always reading. You and I always kind of geek out when we get together, and I give you stuff. You always give me a little seed, and then I go and do like the Piaget kind of thing. But who are some of the ones that are influencing you these days, and where are you with, like, because you and I are kindred spirits in that we're always looking and digging deep to get to the roots.
Yeah. What am I thinking about right now? I do a lot of portrait commissions, so I'm working on a few of those right now. I don't know if you can see these mannequins back here. And then right now, actually for years now, I've always been interested in architecture. It's always around building and architecture. Like, I grew up in a part of New Jersey. I had some beautiful old houses from like the turn of the century. Actually, some people might know about George Post. George Post was the architect for the New York Stock Exchange building, beautiful Beaux-Arts building. And I remember being in his house as a kid, because my dad's a carpenter, so he'd work on these houses. And not a huge house, but beautiful, very grand. And I just I think early on those things were sort of planted in me. And then I remember going to New York and seeing sort of Beaux-Arts Grand Central Station. Everyone's familiar with that. Incredible stuff, and just being in these spaces and thinking, like, this is so amazing, like, so sort of fills you with something, and so life affirming about it. And that was kind of in the background of doing figure painting and drawing and learning, and I think I just got to a point where I thought, like, I really love this stuff. I really should take it more seriously, and I started to. I say this very hesitantly. I started to teach myself architecture. I'm not an architect, nor could I probably design a building, but at least like architectural design, constructing facades, getting 19th century books, just like you would a 19th century book on figure drawing or something, and just going through the exercises, learning the orders. Like most things, when you learn about them, this thing that was kind of amazing but a little bit fuzzy turns into a technicolor thing, and you go around the streets of New York with a little bit more knowledge, and you realize how these architects really were playing and designing, and you just learn these standards, but in real life they're doing all kinds of things, mixing and matching, and you start to see all the peculiar things in them that you didn't see before. I always loved the Richard Morris Hunt Memorial, the great architect that was designed for him. Daniel Chester French, one of my favorite sculptors, did the bronzes for that. Exquisite sculpture. But the actual architecture of the monument is really unusual and beautiful too, by I think it's
66, right?
Yeah, it's right across the street from
the Frick.
From the Frick, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you start to become interested in those things and the design element of it. I was always interested too in the kind of Renaissance ideal of the artist being the designer of everything, not just a specialist as a painter. And so I couldn't help but be curious, like, why? Like, what's that? Why is that so important? There's got to be some practical reason, not just like some arbitrary ideal that somebody came up with. Learning about the union, not just of sculpture and drawing, which we were talking about, but also what does architecture have to do with that? And because historically, of course, these were brought together. I think too, before the Art Students League was the league, it was the Arts Building. I think, if I'm not mistaken, on the top facade of the building, it still says sculpture, painting, and architecture. William Ware is an American who came up with a great book in the turn of the century, teach Americans these things, and I just went through his book on my own. So yeah, I'm interested in that. A lot of the compositional designs I'm coming up with are still oil paintings, but incorporate those aspects of it. I've been incorporating kind of architectural design into it. That kind of dovetails with PA's books about sciography, how to project light onto form, and which I enjoy, and I enjoy the trompe l'oeil effect of it. It also kind of was just another way to fabricate something that I already wanted to fabricate. So if I could fabricate it in marble or limestone or plaster, that would be equally satisfying to me. So thinking about. I remember an architect. I met several architects in New York who were very generous with their time, pointing me in the right direction. So I certainly didn't come up with all this on my own. One of them introduced me to the Wellington Monument that's in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. It's named after Wellington, who's buried there. I think he's buried there. And it's architecture, sculpture, marble. It has these two allegorical figures that are kind of very Michelangelo-esque, like larger-than-life female figures who are like have shields and they're like stabbing demons in the neck, and they're like look like they're falling over. It's just over the top. And I say this whole story now. I can't remember the artist's name, but he's a famous British painter. He's known for doing genre scenes. But anyway, my friend who in New York sent me the quote by him, and he was asked, how can you do all of these different arts so well? How can you be a sculptor, architect, interior designer, painter? And his reply is, I know of but one art. And of course the one art is design. And to be an artist who thinks of themselves principally as a designer first and not a specialist in any particular medium is something I find very attractive and try to implement in my studio practice. So I'm always trying to learn some new design quality to get interested in.
Yeah, and also good teacher. I hate when I hear all the time like those who can't teach, and I'm like, No, I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think you've had a good teacher then,
Right.
if you're saying that. But I don't know. I have so many weird, crazy stories of all the things that I've done, but they've influenced all the experience, and it's a deep well for me to always pull from when it's like, what do you want to paint? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I was totally almost going to go into architecture when I was at Mass Art, and I just found like three-dimensional forms as being very, very interesting. It's not something I had sculpted a lot as a kid, but working in like a space. And I found that like once I came into painting and now I'm talking about it as sculpting the forms, I see that I was trying to, at an early age, at 18, 19, 20, trying to put that into my work.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned teaching too. Like the best teachers, I think, are people who are just interested in all kinds of things and they enjoy sharing it. And a lot of times teaching is really kind of structured sharing.
Yeah.
And it's all of the teachers I know that have affected me are like that. They almost can't wait to kind of talk about this thing that they themselves are interested in. So,
enthusiasts.
Yeah,
for sure. At Mass Art, I remember one of my reviews. Did you have reviews at Ducray or no?
No, I don't think. What do you mean by review? Like they review work or something?
Like every quarter, every semester at the end, we would have the faculty come together and look at your work as a whole. I think we do them here at Lyme. I think Jordan and Maya have to do it, but thank God I don't have to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of it. I understand why it's important. Anyway,
I don't think I've ever done it. I don't think I've ever been
had one
in one or
been
had
in one?
to deliver one, so I don't know.
I've been on both ends of it at Mass Art, where we had to like get together and give student reviews, and they had to sit in a room and we blasted them or praised them or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the reviews I got at Mass Art from a three-dimensional industrial design teacher who was trying to convince me to go into 3D. She said that your drawing and your color is average at best, and that you should consider a three-dimensional. And I thought, like, wow, that's...
It also suggests you'll never get good at those things.
Well, that's the interesting thing is, like, I think some people can take that and be like...
And here you are, you wrote the book on it.
Well, that's what I think is incredible, is, like, some people can either take that and be like, poor me, I'm going to drop out. And I just took it as, like, well, I want to learn all those things. Yeah. And I want to learn three-dimensional sense. And you're basically telling me my strengths, and I love it, and I'll play to them, but I also want to work on my weaknesses.
Totally.
And yeah, I wrote a book on color. I'll probably do a book on drawing one of these days.
Go for it.
But yeah, and then in the same sense, I'm like, yeah, well, three-dimensional sense, I think, is really what makes the best painters good.
Totally. And also you're kind of talking, like, weeding out your own inadequacies. Like, really, I mean, that's not something that's very fun. It's not, can be very, very depressing. Looking at your work and saying, like, where do I really need to improve?
Yeah.
It takes a very honest and it sometimes feels like you're going back to the beginning too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did you play sports at all? You're 6'1" or 6'2", right?
You'd think I'd be like a basketball player or something, but I'm not. I'm just bad at it, so I don't.
That's all good. That's why most people go into art,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I think Little League didn't last very long. I was a very small kid, and then I got into soccer. Soccer was cool. It was just like kick this ball and run around, perfect. But as I got older, I went into more like independent things like skateboarding and stuff.
Yeah.
That I also don't think I was very good at, but it served its purpose at the time.
Yeah, I think the reason why I bring it up is I played 4 years of high school basketball and 3 years of high school football. We won the Super Bowl. I got this big stupid ring that I never wear because it's gaudy, but it's cool, and it was awesome to be a part of it and be a part of a team. But the interesting analogy that a friend and I talk about all the time is, like, there's the star of the basketball team. Now, I wanted to play professional basketball. I was never good enough.
Really?
Yeah, but
cool.
Like the Celtics weren't going to call or draft a player who averaged like 1 point a game and was the backup center in high school.
Yeah.
But there's the star of the team, right? There was the star of my team. This guy Adam Willett was amazing. He averaged something like 20 points. It was he was all-star, all those things, right? he didn't go on to play college, right? I think he played a little bit at UMass Lowell, because I'm from Lowell, Massachusetts. But it's almost like every stage that you go up into, you're now in the pool with all the other people that were the all-stars of all those leagues, right? So so it begins to narrow. And then in that is now the all-star that's going, of college. If you're a D3, you're not going to get drafted to the NBA. The NBA takes 60 professionals from D1 that are amazing. There's so many schools. Right. There's like 200 schools that are in D1 or 128 or whatever it is. And it's like every other team may get one person to go to the NBA. One person. And then once they make it to the NBA, there's the 15th person on the bench, right? And then there's the all-star.
Yeah.
So every time it just keeps narrowing, and I think taking the ability to see where you're at and just say, like, here's a realistic analysis of you, and you don't understand color and drawing. Again, for me, that was like I can either cry over it or like realize, how do I become the best?
Yeah.
And I think like turning that switch is is key.
So with sports, there's obvious physical limitations, right? Especially with like basketball or something. If you're not a certain height, I imagine it's just kind of not going to happen. So
yeah, there's always exceptions, but yeah, for the most part, like if you're 6'1" like I was, I would be a point guard, the smallest guy on the court. Allen Iverson was 6'1". Okay, he looks tiny.
So not out of the question, but okay. So those things aside, did you, unlike drawing and painting, did you experience the other kinds of doubts with basketball? Where you're like, yeah, is this really what I want to do? Maybe I want to do something else. Or
yeah, I think what it was is that my mom probably could have played professional sports, and she was amazing, and she's the one who showed me how to play, and I wanted to be good like her. But she gave me analysis all the time. She told me I didn't look like I had rhythm out there. She said, it looks like you're kind of forcing it. So I was just a big guy who's kind of like, should go take a dance class or something. But like I wasn't naturally, the way I played the game wasn't the flow that needed to happen. Okay.
But unlike your experience with painting, when, tell me if this is true or false, you sort of hit that wall of, I have to improve in these ways, but didn't continue with it. But with painting, you received the criticism, you kind of hit a wall, but your response was, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, for sports, it was like, I didn't give up. I got cut from my freshman year high school basketball team, and I asked the coach if I could still go play because I was desire.
Yeah.
The thing, my mom, who was a coach also, was like, the difference between you and everyone else, I think, is drive. Like, when people give up, you just keep going. And I still feel like part of me is like, am I smart or stupid for continuing to go down this path? Because I see the people that went to Mass Art with me, and they're not, a lot of them are not even doing it anymore.
Right.
And I'm just like, I can't imagine how anybody would not still be doing it 25 years later.
Right.
And I'm just like, I guess they just didn't desire it. Maybe they had different life things happen. But for me, I'm like, I guess I'm stupid for continuing to go. And they're all like, I can't believe you made it, or all these things that I'm like, I had no choice.
But would you say too, this is kind of where I'm going with it, that your choice to continue adversity and all felt like a very natural choice for you?
I think what it was is that basketball was extremely difficult to get really good, and I didn't have the talent.
Yeah.
I was good. I wasn't great. And my mom kind of was like, you're already really good at art, and you're winning awards, and you're kind of not taking it for granted, but not focused on that. You're focused on basketball.
Right.
And like, if you put the same drive and energy into art, because I think the other part for me was like, no one in my family had gone to college. So my dad didn't graduate high school. My mom went to like a year of community college. So we had no path to follow.
Okay.
So for me, I was like, I don't know, is there a future in art?
It's hard as a kid to sort of envision that if there's no one in front of you.
Yeah, I think I was like, my dad was in the Army, and he got drafted, and he was a mailman, and I thought like, well, I could go in the Marines or something, and I think I had like gone to to get enlisted or something. It was like, maybe I'll go there, and they were calling me all the time because I was big.
Yeah.
Not big, but I was 5'10" or 6 feet in high school. But yeah, and then it was like the focus kind of shifted, and then once the focus shifted, I won a ton of awards in high school. I'm sure you did too. And then like again, it's the big fish in a small pond into everybody won an award to get into mass art, and then from there, how do you become the best? And I still wasn't the best. I just feel like I never stopped doing it.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of the needle in the haystack idea. The person that finds the needle in the haystack isn't the best needle finder. The other people give up first.
That's good.
Like and the person just keeps going. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that has to be some part of it, but I think many of those other people wanted it on some level. But
yeah, I think you and I were talking about this earlier, that like there's a desire, and who are we doing it for? And I think of Andre Agassi, of like he was playing tennis for his dad, and I was questioning why I was doing art. Who was it for? Was it for me? Was it for my mom? Was it for like just to show that I had talent to do something? And it wasn't until I was able to kind of look inward and be like, this is a beautiful thing that, art is a way of living, not as a way of making a living. Mm-hmm. That unlocked, that's a Robert Henri quote, unlocked this sense of like, this is just a way to see everything. And it really touches on kind of what you and I have been talking about for a while here, is like, I now see architecture, I stare at people on the train, I don't care if I'm staring at somebody, I'm just seeing the things that,
Yeah, you'd be doing this whether or not it was your full-time gig.
I did, yeah.
You'd be figuring out another way to, it's sort of not about that.
Yeah, and I think that like if I look back at what it was at basketball, was there was a beautiful thing I was trying to achieve, mm-hmm. And like that's the same desire I have as an artist, which is to just create and find meaning in the things that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, completely.
Yeah, and I don't know if this was your experience, but they'll tell me that I don't remember. You certainly there are moments of doubt and moments where you're like, they're more like, should I do this or should I do that? But the progression, looking back on it, felt pretty natural, because it just felt like this was what I was good at. This is what made sense to me. Opportunities kept coming up, and you just sort of keep going, and doing it. Looking back, it feels pretty natural. Even when things got very difficult, the difficulty was to figure out how to continue to progress doing the thing you wanted to do. Absolutely. Not like, should I do this or not? It was, I remember like early on, you mentioned your mom, very supportive parents, and I would get up to, when I first started going to the Art Students League, and also a little bit at the beginning of Janus too, I would take the train in from New Jersey, and it was door to door, 2 hours.
Yeah.
And there was a time there where it was every weekday. And I would get up at like 4 a.m, and my dad would already be drinking coffee, and he would ask me like, how bad do you want to do this?
Yeah.
And it was like, not like in a doubtful way, but just like in a parental, like, this is, how bad do you want this?
It's the right time to ask that question.
Yeah.
Because it really, that's what we do, I think, as teachers, right? Is you test them. And it's not to say don't do it.
Yeah.
It's to say like, think about it.
Yeah.
Think about why you're doing this, because that's the action is louder than the words.
It was, yeah. And actually, surprisingly, looking back on it, I remember just not thinking much about it at all, because it felt so like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
I want to get on this train right now,
Yeah, there's a lot of that too in my training as well, in which, like at Water Street, I was super broke. It sounds like we had very similar stories. I was so broke that I think Jake just saw that I was broke and was like, hey, you know how to fix computers, because my brother was a Mac genius at the Apple store, and I knew a lot from Chris, who went to Mass Art with me, that I could kind of get my way around like fixing a computer mostly, and he was the one I would call if I couldn't figure it out. Mm-hmm. And then Jacob, I think, saw like, somebody had asked to fix something, and I was like, I know how to fix that really quick, and I did it. And he was like, do you want to work off tuition at Water Street to be the Mac guy, mm-hmm. or the computer guy? I said, sure. And it was like, came out with a couple other stipulations, like Joshua Rock was doing it at the time in Hey
Yeah.
Sweet Marriage Song. So I was like, yeah, sounds good to me. Like, it was $325 at the time, or $350. It was so cheap. But I was so broke that I was like,
You were elated probably.
yeah, I was like, amazing. How am I going to now pay rent, which is $550? And I was like, if I can just make $600 or $700. Oh, we're in Astoria, we're in a 3-bedroom. You know, one of those like, get everybody into a house and pay the cheapest you can. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was like then I was able to kind of barter my way through everything, and I look at it and I was like, the only way that I could make money when I was there, because I still was making $0. I was a waiter in the West Village at Santa Bros restaurant.
Oh, cool, yeah.
So I would leave 2 times during the week and then work on the weekends. And I wouldn't get home till I think sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning to be back at Water Street for 8:30 a.m. But I still would do it.
Yeah, totally.
And I would try to save money, so I would ride my bike from the West Village to Astoria.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
The things that we do, but
Yeah.
you know, you do them as a younger, and you're just like, there's something in the story of telling it and looking back and being like, where people can't really be like, how did you make it anywhere with
Yeah.
yours? Like, clearly you were gonna, if you were riding a bike at 2 a.m.
Yeah. And you probably, yeah, and in those moments you're just doing the thing you need to do. Like, you're not, like, it's, the frustration is getting done what you want to do, not like whether or not you should do it. So, yeah.
When you were at Janus, what are some of the, you know, what are some of the things you were doing? Were you working?
Yeah, I was monitoring and living in Harlem. Janus was a great experience. That was less than ideal working conditions. The studio was amazing. The light was amazing, but it was in an old like woodshop building. So the heat was virtually non-existent. We were constantly freezing. I don't know how the models got through it. Sometimes they would wear like socks and stuff like that. We would put so there's those old industrial paned windows. You know, and they're huge because built
Like a mill or something.
Yeah,
Like an old mill.
Exactly. Or it was like an old, like kind of like a mill, and of course the windows are full of holes. So in the winter it was just blowing in and out, and the heat barely worked anyway, so it didn't really matter. So we kind of taped up the size of the window with big sheets of plastic you get at like a hardware store. You would see the air coming in from the outside in and out, like it was a big lung just going in and out, in and out, in and out. And you realize basically you were essentially outside. You just were, there was no real difference. It was so cold. And but yeah, again, it's one of those things, you're talking about adversity, you're just like
the substance was much more about getting the substance of what was being taught than it was to care about a hole in a window, right?
Totally. I don't remember for a moment thinking, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, I was just like, how do I stay here? Like, it's just,
or how do we make this work?
Yeah, how do we make it work?
Like it's a duct tape, piece of duct tape away from falling apart.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, in terms of like how I made it through that, like, before I moved to New York, I worked a lot. Like, I mowed lawns for a while. Worked with my dad a lot, like just doing carpentry work. There's where I'm from in New Jersey, there's various, like, it's very equestrian. So there's like different estates that have lots of lawns that all need to be cut. So you would sort of work as like a
farm hand. Did you do the push mower?
No, they had like nice fancy ones.
Oh, nice.
So like you'd be on this ride-on lawnmower, and you'd have like a gallon of water, and they'd be like, "Well, see you later. Just come back when you're done."
Yep.
And you just mow and mow and mow. Weed whacking. You have to weed whack all the fences.
Make it work.
Like that. It was just like, yeah. But one of them too was a pretty good paying job. I actually managed to save some money with that one. I also would, like, they'd have I didn't really have any experience like working with horses, but sometimes you'd help. So they'd be like, okay, move this horse over to this other stall. How do you do that? This thing is huge. And so I remember them giving me the rope and telling me how to hold this horse. And just then when I knew how to do it, I just stood there and looked at this huge animal and being like, what? Like, it could do whatever it wants. Like, what am I going to do? But it just followed you.
That could overpower you.
Oh, it could squash you in a second. But yeah, it did exactly as you led it to do. Wow. It was amazing. And, but stuff like that. It was it's a part of New Jersey that a lot of people don't know about. It's a sort of beautiful farm country. So,
yeah. So you must have a sweet spot for students that are struggling and trying to work and also do things at the same time.
Totally. It's not ideal, but there are definitely advantages. It's always great to give yourself fully to something, but I think the advantages is you're more likely to have a much more realistic picture of things.
Yeah. If you can dedicate the time.
If you can.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah.
Or a realistic picture of life.
Yeah.
You're more likely to have if you're working and making your way that way. And I think there's less of a tendency to waste time. When you're there to work. Whereas if you can kind of come and go as you want, you might be more casual about things. But I say that, but there's wonderful and talented people who appreciate the gifts that they have and the advantages, and they go for it, and they're better for it too. So I certainly didn't have every advantage, but compared to many, I have only things to be grateful for. So I think everybody just has to, regardless, they just use the time they've been given.
Yeah, just figure out a way and make it work.
Yeah.
I remember I left Water Street for a year, and I was just broke. I was still broke.
Totally.
Even with working at nights and paying $5.50 for the, I think it was $5.50 or $6, whatever it was, and I was still maybe making $800 a month.
Yeah.
$200 for food.
Totally.
In travel to get into Manhattan. That I was presented with an opportunity to work at Ralph Lauren for a year and make, I think I made $100,000, and I was I don't even know what $100,000 was. Yeah. So somebody had asked me. I was always connected back to Ralph Lauren, and I feel crass about kind of throwing money out, but I was connected to Ralph Lauren, and somebody had said they were looking for a freelancer graphic designer, and I was like, sure, I'll throw my hat in the ring. Mm-hmm. I'll just give them a number that if they say yes to, I would be stupid not to do it.
Right.
And I went into the interview, and he said, how much do you want? I said $50 an hour, and he said, okay, can you start on Monday? And I was like, what?
Did I say 50? I said 75.
Yeah, but I was still $50.
Yeah.
You said yes to that, and I remember just going home on the train. I think it was 97,000. I was like, if I work every 40 hours a week for 52 weeks, that's 97,000. I could leave and come back, and I'll be. I don't have to work. I don't have to go through this craziness. Totally. And I did it, and then I did GCA, because Jacob was merging Water Street and GCA, so I did GCA at night with Cammie to do my cast painting, and then when I came back in the program the next year, I just finished. So I did 3 years, but I never finished sequentially. Just kind of pieced it together.
Yeah. Yeah, even in the beginning too, that's really hard. But I even remember there were times when I was working as an artist and teaching, and I hit a rough spot at one point, and I was thinking how am I? You sort of really, how am I going to do this? And I think there was a misalignment with teaching. I don't remember the circumstances, but it was a rough spot. And a good friend of mine, her grandfather needed a new gazebo built in New Jersey, so I take the train out there.
You're basically a carpenter.
And I was and I remember thinking it ended up being a great experience, and it totally helped me a lot. But it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do at the time. I was I want to paint paintings and teaching, and I just was in this spot. But you gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah. And so even those moments where it feels like you're not exactly backtracking, but you have to piece it together. And even when you think it's going well, you're going to hit rough spots even then. So
Well, it's a balance of what it is that you need and what it is you can do, and money is a factor in it, and
right.
if you don't have any,
Right.
you got to go make it to do the thing. So yeah, I wouldn't have done it another way. I think it actually makes for an interesting story.
Yeah, no, I have no regrets about it at all. It was great. Yeah, I would say like probably Janus Collaborative was like the really roughing it experience, but and the league was great. The league has great facilities and big studios, but yeah, like you mentioned before, like you'd get a lot of Dan and Michael were popular teachers, and you'd go in and there'd be like sometimes like 40 people in there, and you just have like a little chair here in the corner, and you're like, I'm just happy to have this corner. Let's just go.
Yeah, and you got all different aspects of people at the league too. People that were just doing just there in their own blissful little way, drawing, and some people were really interested in what Dan and Michael probably had to say. Mm-hmm. I mean, I do love the league, and I still teach workshops there from time to time.
Yeah, and it's a great slice of New York. It's a beautiful building on 57th Street, and it's as diverse as the city itself. So, from there, I'm trying to think of other things. So what did you do immediately after Water Street?
After Water Street, it's so funny because after Water Street, I was in the fashion world for a while at Ralph Lauren, which was my tie to New York. I got a job as a waiter in the plaza, and then I got a job in the art department at Ralph Lauren 2004 to 2005, and then realized I didn't want to do it, and then went to grad school, thought I'd be an animator, came back, turned into a painter. Okay. But I freelanced at Ralph Lauren off and on, and I've been doing it kind of remotely, and I did it all the way up until Water Street and Water Street GCA, and then through GCA they had me doing these small little projects, and then Gina, my wife, was there. That's where we met, and then she was like, they're looking for somebody to freelance for 3 months, and I said sure. Somebody was on leave, and Tim Holmes, the guy who's the art director, was like, he loved me, and my brother worked there too, so my brother's kind of intertwined with these stories.
Right. Yeah.
And basically, he was like, I'd love to hire you, and I was like, I'm trying to, be a teacher and also a painter, even though, painting's so hard to sell paintings that I was like, I'll teach and do it. Mm-hmm. And we had moved out of Forest Hills into Gina's parents' house, and I was like, we can't stay here forever, but the hope was to buy a house. And if you wanted to buy a house and get a mortgage, they would need to look at your taxes from the last 4 years. Okay. I was like, well, good luck with that. What I just defined was like this $800 a month. I think some years I didn't even make enough to have to claim taxes. Right. And it was like, how are you going to afford a mortgage? Right. So as I was leaving the 3-month job at Ralph Lauren, Tim was like, I would love to hire you full time. And I said, not really interested. And then I just rethought it and thought, like, you know what? I do want to have a house, and I have to think about more than just me and my ambitions here. And if we want to have a family and do this together, we just got married, don't want to live in the in-laws' house forever. I do want a house. And really what it did was it made it so that it took the idea of like making paintings and trying to make a living right off out of school off the table, and said, like, chill, like you can just do it a little bit more, like work through all those things for a while. Yeah. And that's figure out what it is you want to do. So it really took the pressure off. I said yes to the full-time job at Ralph Lauren. I worked there until 2016. Okay. Full-time, so 5 years, full-time graphic designer. But I love it because that job really helped me compositionally with kind of, that's what you're doing when you're doing graphic design, designing into a space. And, composition now is something I love. So I always take some opportunity as positive and say, like, what is it that I can learn? And I was picking the brains of everybody who was there.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And then what made you decide to do your first book?
That was so random. That was Ken Salas, who had, or Ken Salas, I say it wrong. Yeah. He got a, he's a go-getter and a fabulous musician, magician, and musician. He got the job for the book for the landscapes in oil, and he knew that I knew Photoshop from my Ralph Lauren days, and he said, "Can you help me do the illustrations?" And I said, "Yeah, I went to school for illustration, and I know how to use Photoshop." So he came over to my house every week, maybe for a couple months, and then we just work on the illustrations, and he would bounce the ideas off me, and he's like, "You know what you're talking about? Like, you should write a book." And I said, if the opportunity ever came up, I would do it. And then he just called me out of the blue one day and he said, "There's an opportunity. They're looking for a still life painter right now to write a book." And I was like, okay.
That's great.
Yeah, and just totally not understanding how anything worked. This is just me in a nutshell. I was like, yeah, let's do it. I'll jump right in. And I talked to Victoria on the phone, and I said, it was like a Wednesday, and I was driving up to Mass Art, which is 3 hours each way. And I said, yeah, I'll have the sample chapter, the intro, the index, and also the analysis of the market and all this stuff to you by Monday. And she's like, you don't have to, like, that's a ridiculous turnaround. You don't have to do that. But me being corporate, Ralph Lauren, I was like, no, I'm just going to do it so it's off the plate, and then I can go paint.
Okay, yeah.
And I did it in like a weekend. And she was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And then it sat and sat and sat for like 6 months. And I thought, like, I'm not going to do it. Like, they're taking too long and they don't want it. And I almost gave up hope, because I had submitted it in April. And by August, I had emailed them a couple of times, like, what's the story? Were we doing this? And Gina was pregnant. And Scarlett, well, we didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl. And we just knew that the baby was coming in December. And I was like, the closer to December this gets, I can't knock a book out. And it was the end of August in which they finally got the approval and said, when do you think you can do this? And again, me just being like, I've never written a book, I don't know. And I thought, like, maybe a month? How long do you need to write a book? But she said, can you do it maybe by the end of the year? And I said, that's perfect, because that's when my daughters or my babies come in. And but now I found out from talking to other people that that's a ridiculously short amount of time.
Wow, okay.
But I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
You didn't know any better. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, and a lot of people ask how long it took to write the book, and I'm like 6 months.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, these concepts are in our head. Just like if you had to write a book, it's not like I had to go figure out how to draw and paint. It was like, no, I just have to get it out and then put it in an order. Yeah. And I think that's what teachers do well, is like restraint on stuff and introducing it at the right time and putting it in an order that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To sort of organize and order something that's very organic in your mind.
Yeah, and I don't think we're so linear sequential in terms of like start with A and then B and C, and that's kind of what I try to do in the book. But I also preface it by saying, you want to learn how to draw before you can do this and that. But we were talking about earlier, painting is a series of corrections. You don't ever stop drawing. So to master that, and then realize even when you master it, you're still not the master of it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. That you're still always drawing.
Yeah, it's I'll tell students, like, the drawing doesn't really begin until you begin to correct.
Yeah,
it's really the same thing. But you also try to remind them that in the beginning it is very frustrating and it has a very unnatural feeling. It's kind of start, stop. And then as you get better and better and better, it becomes streamlined, and it starts to feel more like you are just kind of generating something. Like the corrections and the additions are more like you're just sort of generating something and pushing it forward, and not so like, I can't believe I messed this up. I got to figure it out now. What did I do wrong, kind of thing.
Yeah, I just feel it's always like sculpting. It's like it's tapping it where it needs to go. And it's like the forms are felt. I think that's where a lot of the times my verbiage for this is poetry or poetic. It's not so much like two-dimensional. It's really three-dimensional, feeling and expressive. I think it was Faber Barron who said science is intellectual, art is expressional, and we're somewhere in the middle, I think, between these two things. But I think the poetry and the expression is a major factor, and you can't go too far just into the purely analytical side of what it is that a drawing is. You know?
Totally, and you could even say that it's, you know, what it's all about ultimately. Actually, right behind your head, there's a book by John Ciardi called "How Does a Poem Mean?" And I don't read as much as poetry right now as I wish I could, but I used to read more. And that was a great book and a helpful guide on like what poetry really is. Ciardi did I think it's probably the most most read English translation of Dante. But he has his own original work too. But that book is great because you know, every single page he sort of takes you through understanding a poem, and so much of it could just go directly into painting or sculpture. And even the title, "How Does a Poem Mean?" it kind of sums it up perfectly.
Love it.
Because, you know, the poem, it's about how it brings its meaning into the world, not about what it means. Yeah. It's really an exploration in the division of form and content. Like the content of the poem, when someone asks, what is this poem about, is to actually miss the poem, in his words, the poemness of the poem. And it's really its formal structure that we are
it's prosody, right? It's this ambiguity of deconstructing it and having your sense of what the poem is. It doesn't have to be so literal.
Not literal, but also how certain words and metaphors and combinations of words and structures evoke feelings of pulses and emotions,
right,
and allude to things that maybe are not exactly the content, but are brought into that content through this poetic structure.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm trying to think of an example. He uses, you know, you might think, you know, I don't know if he uses this example, but, you know, when we read sonnets are usually a poem for love. But like, there's something about the structure of the poem itself that is conducive to describing and evoking those effects that sort of love is about. Even if the outside of the actual content of the poem, what they're talking about. Like Ciardi has one really good one called, he coins the phrase inner requiredness. I don't even know if that's a real word, but he kind of makes this word the inner requiredness of a poem, that it's really not until the poemness of the poem comes into view in the writing of the poem that it becomes a poem. And it takes a long time, and he has the word inner requiredness, that it's sort of folding in on itself. It's this kind of self-contained thing. And I just thought, you know, there's just such a direct link to that with a great painting. A great painting, it's, regardless of its content, its formal structure, its edge qualities, its textures, its composition, you know, the kind of layout of the kind of shapes or whatever, is sort of harmoniously making a kind of very real and potent feeling that it's all sort of a part of itself and interrelated. I started getting interested into that because when end of my student years, I was introduced to a book called Michelangelo and the Language of Art, a scholar named David Summers. It's obviously about Michelangelo, but it also goes a lot into the history of the Florentine Renaissance and the importance of poetry for those Florentine artists. It's the phrase like "as in painting, so in poetry," or maybe it's the reverse. I forget who said that. The ways in which they saw those as so intertwined. It's been a while since I've read it, so I wish I could say something intelligent about it. But I think that's where I started to think about poetry more seriously. And you know, since it was so part of their thinking, I thought, well, I want to know what that was like. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I look at a lot of old master work, and I'm like, I don't think it's always just so descriptive. I think there's a ambiguity in the work that they're pulling the audience in, and I don't know. There's just so much more spirit.
Yeah.
In that work. I think that's probably what ties us to it. It's not something that can just be unlocked and copied. It's something that must be dug and fully understood.
There's always like an enigmatic strangeness. Like there's all kinds of words. I just became aware of as an art critic from the turn of the century, Pater. I forget his first name. I got interested in him because he was in this. I love Thomas Dewing, an American painter. I guess he was in the Thomas Dewing circle when Dewing was in New York. And so I started reading Pater. He's got a great collection of essays on, I think it's just called The Renaissance. And he has one on Michelangelo's poetry. And he's talking about, I thought this was just really interesting, just even as a thing to think about. That there's sort of like two sides to Michelangelo's work. There's the part where you see right away this over-the-top, like bold Michelangelo, just kind of larger-than-life feeling. Not just in his sculpture, obviously, his painting, his architecture just has this kind of boldness. But there's also this like strangeness. There's this part of it that it's sort of odd and weird, and I mean that in the best sense, like that this strangeness of it, like. Why is it turned that way, or why is it just carved a little that way, and like the part's a little like not quite right, but not quite right. It sort of works in the content in the whole of the work. And what he says is that he thinks that when you look at sort of late medieval and medieval work has a kind of oddity to it. It has a strangeness to it, but the boldness part of it, and that's sort of part of him because he's in a lot of ways this late medieval Renaissance man. But there's also this boldness that carries on into the Baroque period. So many of the artists who copied him and were inspired by him later have this kind of bold, over-the-top thing, but they lack the strangeness. And he actually goes as far as to say he thinks Michelangelo is at the end of something, and marks the end of something. This sort of middle-age mind, not the beginning of something, which is how we usually think of him as beginning this Baroque period. And I love that, just to think about that, where these aesthetic qualities come from. And I thought that, like, the sort of strangeness of Michelangelo, and I think that's true of most art, if not all art, that I think, it sounds like you two are most affected by, that has this...
not the obvious, yeah.
Yeah, who is it that said, like, beauty is something that has something a little strange about the proportions. Who was it that said something like that?
I don't know. It sounds like an awesome quote.
Yeah, it's not exactly right, but it's like something about, it has to do with the proportions being a little weird, like a little strange.
Yeah.
And a little off. And it is a kind of like deliberate offness that causes you to go, yeah, but that is just, I don't know. Like, and but I think when artists do this, they're very deliberate about it. It's not just they're consciously thinking about crafting this inner oddity about it.